I never imagined that being kicked out of first class would become the moment that changed everything. But when that arrogant, wealthy woman had me removed from my seat like I was nothing, she had no idea my husband was about to make a phone call that would ground the entire flight and teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know those moments when your entire world shifts in the blink of an eye? When you realize that kindness and humility matter more than designer clothes and flashy jewelry? This is my story, and I'm Rebecca, the woman who lived through one of the most humiliating, yet ultimately empowering experiences of my life. It was a Thursday evening in October, and I was finally heading home after spending 2 weeks caring for my elderly mother in Portland. She had undergone surgery, and as her only daughter, I couldn't bear the thought of her recovering alone. Those 14 days had been filled with hospital visits, medication schedules, and sleepless nights spent worrying about her recovery. But seeing her smile again, watching her strength return day by day, made every moment worth it. I had booked my flight home to Chicago at the last minute, choosing the red-eye because it was significantly cheaper than the daytime options. Money wasn't exactly tight, but I had always been raised to be practical and thoughtful with expenses. My husband Marcus often teased me about my frugal habits, especially considering his success in business, but old habits die hard. Growing up in a middle-class family had taught me the value of every dollar, and that lesson had stayed with me even after marriage. The airport was bustling with the usual evening crowd of business travelers and families heading home from vacations. I made my way through security with my simple black carry-on bag and worn leather purse that had been my faithful companion for years. My outfit was comfortable for traveling, nothing fancy, just dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that I had thrown on that morning. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and I wore minimal makeup after the long day at the hospital with my mother. Looking back, I realize now how my casual appearance would set the stage for everything that followed. In a world where people are often judged by their exterior, I was about to learn a harsh lesson about assumptions and prejudice, but I was also about to discover something beautiful about the power of love and justice. As I approached Gate B-47, I could see the sleek aircraft waiting on the tarmac. Flight 847 to Chicago was one of those newer planes with the upgraded first-class cabins that airlines love to advertise. Through the large windows, I watched ground crews preparing the aircraft, their efficient movements reminding me of a carefully choreographed dance. The sight filled me with relief, knowing that in just a few hours, I would be home in Marcus's arms, telling him all about Mother's progress and how much I had missed our quiet evenings together. The boarding announcement crackled through the gate area speakers, and I gathered my belongings, double-checking my boarding pass one more time. Seat 2A, first class. Marcus had insisted on upgrading my ticket when he learned about the red-eye flight, claiming that I deserved comfort after taking such good care of my mother. At first, I had protested, saying it was an unnecessary expense, but he had already made the change before I could argue further. Walking down the jet bridge, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. The past 2 weeks had been emotionally and physically draining, but they had also reminded me of the importance of family and the strength that comes from caring for those we love. I was ready to return to my normal life, to the peaceful routine that Marcus and I had built together over our 3 years of marriage. The flight attendant at the aircraft door greeted me with a professional smile, glancing briefly at my boarding pass before directing me to the left toward first class. The cabin was elegantly appointed with wide leather seats in a rich cream color, each equipped with its own entertainment system and ample legroom. Soft lighting created a warm, welcoming atmosphere that promised a comfortable journey home. I found my seat and began settling in, stowing my carry-on in the overhead compartment and placing my purse in the space beneath the seat in front of me. The leather seat was incredibly comfortable, and I allowed myself a moment of gratitude for Marcus's thoughtfulness in upgrading my ticket. After 2 weeks of sleeping on a hospital chair and an uncomfortable guest bed at my mother's house, the prospect of a peaceful flight was incredibly appealing. That's when she appeared. Victoria Harrington swept into the first-class cabin like she owned not just the plane, but the entire airline. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege, from her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves to her designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her jewelry caught the cabin lights with every movement, particularly the enormous diamond ring on her finger that seemed to sparkle with its own inner fire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria's pale blue eyes swept across the first-class cabin with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating and dismissing people within seconds. When those eyes landed on me, I saw something that made my stomach clench with an uncomfortable familiarity. It was the same look I had encountered occasionally throughout my life, the look that said I didn't belong, that I was somehow less worthy of respect and consideration. She approached her seat, which happened to be directly across the aisle from mine, moving with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. Her expensive heels clicked against the aircraft floor with sharp precision, each step seeming to announce her importance to anyone within earshot. Everything about her demeanor suggested that she viewed the world as her personal kingdom, with everyone else merely existing to serve her needs and desires. As Victoria settled into her seat, I noticed how she continued to glance in my direction, her expression growing increasingly disapproving. It was as if my very presence in first class was personally offensive to her, a violation of some unwritten rule about who deserved luxury and comfort. I tried to ignore her stares, focusing instead on the safety demonstration and preparing myself for what I hoped would be a peaceful flight. The other first-class passengers began boarding, and I observed the stark difference in how Victoria interacted with each person. When a distinguished older gentleman in an expensive suit took the seat behind her, she offered a warm smile and friendly greeting. A well-dressed businesswoman received similar treatment, complete with compliments about her designer handbag. But every time Victoria's gaze returned to me, her expression hardened with unmistakable disapproval. I pulled out my phone to text Marcus that I was on the plane and would be home soon. His response came immediately, filled with heart emojis and excitement about my return. Reading his words filled me with warmth and reminded me of all the reasons I was grateful for my life. Marcus had a way of making me feel cherished and valued that had nothing to do with material possessions or social status. His love was genuine and unconditional, based on who I was as a person rather than what I wore or how I looked. The flight attendants began their final preparations for takeoff, moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency. One of them, a kind-looking woman named Sarah, according to her name tag, stopped by my seat to offer a pre-flight beverage. I requested water with a smile, thanking her for her service. It was a simple interaction, but I always believed in treating service workers with respect and gratitude. Having worked various jobs throughout college, I understood the challenges they faced and the difference that kindness could make in their day. As Sarah walked away, I noticed Victoria watching our interaction with obvious disdain. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows were raised in what appeared to be disgust, as if my polite treatment of the flight attendant was somehow evidence of my unworthiness to occupy a first-class seat. The judgment in her expression was so clear that I felt heat rising in my cheeks, though I tried to maintain my composure. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing our departure and providing the usual information about flight time and weather conditions. As the plane began to push back from the gate, I settled deeper into my seat, hoping that Victoria would lose interest in scrutinizing me once we were airborne. But I couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that this flight was going to be far more challenging than I had anticipated. Through my window, I watched the airport lights growing smaller as we taxied toward the runway. The city below twinkled like scattered jewels, and I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 weeks ago, I had been a worried daughter rushing to her mother's bedside. Now I was returning home as someone who had been reminded of the strength that comes from love and family. Little did I know that this flight would teach me even more about both the cruelty and kindness that exist in the world. The engines roared to life as we prepared for takeoff, and I closed my eyes, saying a silent prayer of gratitude for my mother's recovery and for the husband waiting for me at home. In just a few hours, I would be back in Marcus's arms, safe and loved. But first, I would have to navigate whatever Victoria Harrington had planned, though I had no idea yet just how dramatically this encounter would change both of our lives forever. As the aircraft lifted off the runway, I felt the familiar sensation of gravity pulling me back into my seat. The city lights below grew smaller, creating a beautiful tapestry of twinkling stars across the landscape. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax, thinking that perhaps Victoria would settle into her own world and leave me in peace. But as soon as the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began moving about the cabin, I realized my hopes were about to be shattered. Victoria unbuckled her seatbelt with sharp, deliberate movements, her jewelry catching the cabin lights as she turned to face me directly. Her pale blue eyes were cold and calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. When she spoke, her voice carried across the first-class cabin with a kind of authority that demanded attention from everyone within earshot. "Excuse me," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't really asking for anything. "I believe there's been some sort of mistake with the seating arrangements." Her words hung in the air like an accusation, and I could feel the other passengers beginning to take notice of our interaction. The businessman behind her lowered his newspaper slightly, and the woman across the aisle paused her conversation with the flight attendant. I looked up at Victoria with genuine confusion, checking my boarding pass one more time to make sure I was in the correct seat. "I'm sorry, but I don't think there's been any mistake," I replied politely, holding up my boarding pass for her to see. "This is seat 2A, which matches my ticket perfectly." My voice remained calm and respectful, though I could feel my heart beginning to race with the uncomfortable realization that this was about to become a much bigger issue. Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "Oh, I'm not questioning your ticket, dear," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm questioning how someone like you managed to afford a first-class seat in the first place." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I could hear the sharp intake of breath from several nearby passengers who had overheard her comment. The implications of her statement were crystal clear. In Victoria's mind, my casual clothing and simple appearance automatically disqualified me from belonging in first class. She had made a judgment about my worth based solely on my exterior, assuming that someone who looked like me couldn't possibly have the means or the right to occupy premium seating. The prejudice in her voice was so blatant that it left me momentarily speechless. "I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding," I said quietly, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated further. "Perhaps we could speak privately if you have concerns about the seating arrangements." I was trying to give her an opportunity to back down gracefully, to realize that her assumptions were both wrong and inappropriate. But Victoria seemed energized by my diplomatic response, interpreting my politeness as weakness. She stood up from her seat, her impressive height made even more imposing by her designer heels. "There's nothing private about this situation," she announced loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "Airlines have standards, and those standards exist for very good reasons. When those standards aren't maintained, it affects the experience for legitimate passengers who have paid for premium service." The flight attendant, Sarah, appeared at our side with a concerned expression. "Is everything all right here, ladies?" she asked, her professional training evident in her calm demeanor despite the obvious tension in the air. "Is there something I can help you with?" Her presence brought a momentary sense of relief, and I hoped that a neutral third party might be able to resolve this situation reasonably. Victoria turned her attention to Sarah with the kind of imperious authority that suggested she was accustomed to getting her way in every situation. "Yes, there most certainly is something you can help with," she said, gesturing dramatically in my direction. "I need you to verify this passenger's ticket and ensure that she's actually authorized to be sitting in first class. There are clearly some irregularities here that need to be addressed immediately." Sarah looked between us with obvious confusion, clearly trying to understand what exactly Victoria was suggesting. "Ma'am, all passengers in first class have been verified during the boarding process," she explained patiently. "Everyone's tickets have been checked and confirmed. Is there a specific issue with the seating arrangement that I can help resolve?" Her professional response was exactly what I would have expected, but it only seemed to fuel Victoria's determination. "The issue," Victoria said, her voice rising with indignation, "is that your airline is clearly not maintaining appropriate standards for first-class passengers." "Look at her," she continued, gesturing at me as if I were an exhibit in a museum. "Does she look like someone who belongs in premium seating? This is supposed to be a refined environment for distinguished travelers, not a charity case for people who clearly can't afford to be here." The cruelty of her words left me feeling exposed and humiliated in front of the other passengers. I could see them watching our exchange with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, clearly uncertain about how to respond to such blatant discrimination. Some seemed sympathetic to my situation, while others appeared to be reserving judgment until they could determine who held more social power in this confrontation. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her professional composure beginning to show signs of strain, I need to respectfully remind you that all passengers, regardless of their appearance or background, have the right to occupy the seats they've purchased. This passenger's ticket is completely valid, and she has every right to be here." Her defense of my right to be treated with dignity filled me with gratitude, even as the situation continued to spiral out of control. Victoria's face flushed with anger at being contradicted by someone she clearly viewed as beneath her social status. "Don't lecture me about rights," she snapped. "I know exactly what my rights are as a premium passenger, and one of those rights is to expect a certain caliber of fellow travelers. When airlines start letting just anyone into first class, it degrades the entire experience for those of us who have earned our place here." The assumption that I hadn't earned my place in first class was particularly painful because it revealed so much about Victoria's worldview. In her mind, worth was measured solely by external appearances and material displays of wealth. The idea that someone could be successful, accomplished, or deserving of respect while dressed simply and modestly was apparently incomprehensible to her. She had created a rigid hierarchy in her mind, and she was determined to enforce it. Another flight attendant, an older man named Robert, approached our group with the measured pace of someone experienced in handling difficult situations. "Ladies, I understand there may be some confusion here," he said diplomatically. "Perhaps we could find a solution that makes everyone comfortable. Would either of you be interested in discussing alternative seating arrangements?" His suggestion was clearly an attempt to restore peace to the cabin, but it felt like a betrayal to me. "Absolutely not," I said firmly, finding my voice and my strength after minutes of trying to be diplomatic. "I have a valid ticket for this seat, and I have every right to remain here. I shouldn't have to move simply because another passenger has made unfair assumptions about my worthiness to be in first class." My response seemed to surprise both flight attendants and several of the other passengers, who perhaps expected me to accept the suggested compromise. Victoria's eyes flashed with fury at my refusal to be quietly moved out of her sight. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she declared, reaching for her phone with dramatic flourish. "I'm calling the airline directly to report this situation. Premium passengers shouldn't have to tolerate this kind of disruption to their travel experience. There will be consequences for this mishandling of passenger services." As she dialed, I found myself thinking about all the times throughout my life when I had witnessed or experienced similar situations. The world was full of people who believed that their perceived status gave them the right to treat others as inferior. But I had also learned that real strength came from standing up for yourself and others when faced with injustice, even when it would be easier to simply give in and avoid confrontation. The other passengers in first class were now openly watching our drama unfold, some recording the interaction on their phones while others whispered among themselves about what they were witnessing. I realized that this moment was about much more than just airline seating arrangements. It had become a public example of how prejudice and entitlement could poison interactions between human beings, turning a simple flight into a battlefield over dignity and respect. Victoria's phone conversation was loud enough for everyone to hear as she dramatically described the, quote, unacceptable situation she was being forced to endure. Her version of events painted me as some sort of intruder who had somehow infiltrated first class through fraudulent means, while she positioned herself as the victim of airline negligence and poor customer service. The distortion of reality was so extreme that it would have been laughable if it weren't so hurtful. While Victoria continued her theatrical phone performance, I pulled out my own phone to text Marcus about what was happening. My hands were shaking slightly as I typed, the adrenaline of the confrontation making it difficult to form coherent sentences. I needed his calm presence and rational perspective to help me navigate this unprecedented situation. His response came immediately, filled with outrage on my behalf and determination to protect me from further humiliation. "Don't worry, sweetheart," his text read. "You belong exactly where you are, and anyone who can't see your worth is the one with the problem. Stand your ground, and remember that their behavior says everything about them and nothing about you. I love you, and I'm proud of you for not backing down." His words gave me the strength I needed to continue facing Victoria's assault on my dignity. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Victoria ended her phone call and turned to address the entire first-class cabin as if she were delivering a public service announcement. "I want everyone here to know that I've contacted airline management about this situation," she declared proudly. Premium passengers deserve to travel in an environment that maintains appropriate standards, and when those standards are compromised, we have a responsibility to speak up. Her speech was met with uncomfortable silence from most of the other passengers, though I noticed a few nodding in apparent agreement with her position. The division in the cabin was palpable, with some people clearly sympathizing with my situation while others seemed to support Victoria's right to express her displeasure. It was a perfect microcosm of the broader social tensions that existed in society, where people's worth was too often judged by superficial appearances rather than character or humanity. Sarah approached me privately while Victoria continued holding court with her supporters. "I'm so sorry you're having to deal with this," she whispered sympathetically. "Your ticket is completely valid, and you have every right to be here. Management has been notified of the situation and they're working on a resolution. Please don't let her behavior make you feel like you've done anything wrong." Her kindness in that moment meant more to me than she could possibly know. As the flight continued toward Chicago, I found myself reflecting on the larger implications of what was happening. This wasn't just about one woman's prejudice or one uncomfortable flight. It was about the ways that society creates and maintains artificial hierarchies that divide people based on appearance, wealth, or social status. Victoria's behavior was an extreme example, but the underlying attitudes she represented were far more common than most people wanted to admit. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me either. While Victoria was so focused on maintaining what she perceived as appropriate standards for first-class passengers, she was displaying behavior that was far more unseemly and inappropriate than anything I had done. Her loud complaints, personal attacks, and dramatic phone calls were far more disruptive to the cabin environment than my quiet presence had ever been. Yet she seemed completely oblivious to this contradiction. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.